All right, so get this. We're going deep today. Deep into Descartes.
Oh, yeah.
Descartes' Meditations on First Philosophy.
Okay, yeah, big one.
It's a big one. You sent over some excerpts, and it did. It's amazing because it's not just like your typical philosophy book. Like, he's really trying to rebuild knowledge from scratch.
Yeah, it's like a total, like a philosophical renovation.
Yes.
You know, and what's so interesting is he starts by, like, doing something that seems totally backwards.
Yeah.
He doubts everything.
Yeah.
Like, literally everything.
It's wild.
He even says at one point, I shall proceed by setting aside all that, in which the least doubt could be supposed to exist, just as if I had discovered that it was absolutely false.
Wow. It's like he's really going for it. And he gives all these examples, right? Like how our senses can trick us, like optical illusions or dreams. But then he takes it even further with this crazy thought experiment about an evil genius who might be like messing with our minds.
Right.
That one always gets me.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, how do we know we're not just in some giant simulation?
It is like the Matrix almost.
Yeah.
That's a great point. And that evil genius is really a way for him to just push the skepticism as far as it can go. Like he's really taking it to the limit.
Yeah.
Because his whole thing is he thinks that you can't build a good foundation for knowledge if you're starting with iffy assumptions.
Right.
Garbage in, garbage out.
It's like decluttering.
Yeah.
Like he's got to get rid of all that mental clutter first.
Yeah.
All the beliefs that might be based on like shaky grounds.
Totally.
But then the question is, what's left?
Yeah.
If we doubt everything, how do we know anything?
Well, that's where his famous Cogito argument comes in. I think, therefore I am.
Classic.
Yeah.
Everyone knows that one.
Even if everything is an illusion, the very act of thinking, of doubting, proves that he, the doubter, has to be real.
Yeah. It's like, even if I'm being tricked, the fact that I'm being tricked means I must exist to be tricked.
Exactly.
It's kind of like irrefutable.
Yeah. You can't get around that.
You can't.
And so that realization becomes his, like, bedrock of certainty.
It's the foundation.
Totally.
Okay, so that makes sense. So from this point, he says that the mind, like the thing that's doing the thinking, is more easily known than the body.
Yeah.
Because you could doubt that you have a body.
Right. Like, what if you're dreaming or something?
Exactly. But you can't doubt that you're doubting.
You can't. And it's so cool when you think about it. If you think, what's the most, like, immediate thing you are aware of right now?
Yeah.
It's probably the fact that you are having thoughts.
Yeah.
Or experiencing this moment. That's you cogitoing.
I'm cogitoing right now.
You're cogitoing, yes.
Love it.
And so that kind of highlights a distinction. That's a key part of the meditations.
Yeah.
The difference between the mind and the body.
Okay, so now we've got Descartes, the thinking thing, existing in a world that might just be totally fake.
Could be.
How does he go from there to proving God? Because that's a jump.
It's a big jump.
Yeah.
So in meditation, the third, he turns to the types of ideas that we have and where they come from. And he starts by, like, making this distinction between different kinds of reality.
Okay.
Like, there's formal reality, which is the reality of something that, like, actually exists.
Okay.
Like a tree or a table or something.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And then there's objective reality, which is like it's about the content of our ideas.
Okay.
So, like, the idea of a tree has less objective reality than the idea of a human, which has less than the idea of God.
So some ideas, like the idea of God, have more weight to them,
Yeah.
more perfection.
Like, he's saying our puny little human minds couldn't have come up with it.
So where did it come from?
Well, he says that it must have been planted in our minds.
Okay.
By God.
By God himself.
Yeah. It's the only thing that makes sense, he says, because the cause of an idea must be, like, at least as real as the idea itself.
Right.
And since God is, like, infinitely perfect, the cause must be infinitely perfect too.
Okay, so he's saying that we have this idea of perfection, and the only way we could have gotten that idea is if a perfect being, God, put it there.
Yeah, basically.
I mean, it makes sense, but it also sounds kind of circular, like he's assuming God exists to prove that God exists.
That's a common critique. But Descartes would say, that he's just recognizing the limits of our minds. We have the potential to think about perfection, but only a truly perfect being could make that idea.
Okay, let's say, just for the sake of argument, That we accept his proof for God. So we've got, I think, therefore I am. We've got God. Now what?
Now the question is, if God is perfect and made us, why do we make so many mistakes?
Ooh, that's a good question. It's like flawed design.
Right. So in Meditation 3, he really digs into that problem. He says that error comes from how our intellect and our will work together.
Okay.
Our intellect, like our understanding, is limited.
Yeah, makes sense.
We're only human.
Yeah.
But our will, our ability to choose things, that's unlimited.
Oh, so like our will can be stronger than our intellect. We can choose things even when we don't understand them.
Exactly. And that's where the mistakes come in. When we let our will get ahead of our smarts, when we just choose without really understanding.
Oh, yeah, like when you jump to conclusions or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like, how many times have you made a decision and then regretted it because you didn't really think it through?
That's all the time.
All the time, right. But he doesn't think we're doomed to a life of screw-ups, though.
Okay, good.
It's like he's giving us a pep talk. Hey, your will is strong, but don't let it run wild. Use your intellect. Think things through, and you'll make fewer mistakes.
I like it. It's like, don't just think well.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so back to Descartes. Last time we ended on this cliffhanger. We established, like, I think, therefore I am. We proved God.
Yeah, we got a lot done.
We got a lot done, but now we have to deal with this mind-body problem.
The big one.
What even is the mind-body problem?
Well, like, it's this question, right? Yeah. How can the mind, which Descartes says is, like, not physical, interact with a body, which is totally physical?
Yeah. Like, my mind can make my arm move, but how?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. And to understand how weird this was back then, we got to think about, like, what came before Descartes?
Oh, okay.
Because, like, before him, most people didn't really see the mind and body as, like, totally separate.
So he was, like, shaking things up.
Big time. Like, revolutionary.
Okay, so what did he do?
Well, he said that the mind and body are, like, totally different substances with different properties.
Okay, well, hold on. What's a substance?
Like, imagine the most basic building block of reality, like a tree.
Okay, yeah.
That's a substance.
Gotcha. And the properties, that's like what describes the substance.
Yeah.
Like, it's tall, it's green, it's got leaves, whatever.
Okay, I'm with you. So the mind is one substance, and the body is another.
Exactly. And he says the main property of the mind is thought.
Makes sense.
It's a thinking thing.
And the body, what's its main deal?
The body's all about extension. Like, it takes up space, it's got a shape.
Right, you can touch it.
Exactly.
Okay, but if the mind doesn't take up space, how can it be connected to something that does?
$1 million question, right?
Yeah.
Descartes doesn't have, like, a perfect answer.
Okay.
But he had an idea. He thought maybe the mind and body, they talk through the pineal gland.
The pineal gland, isn't that like the thing that makes us sleepy?
Yep, that's the one.
Yeah.
Tiny little gland in the brain.
Huh. Okay, so how's that work?
Well, he thought that, like, all the info from the senses goes to the pineal gland, and then somehow the mind interacts with it there to make thoughts and feelings and stuff. But doesn't that mean that, like, a tiny gland is controlling our mind? That seems kind of backwards.
Yeah, a lot of people thought so too.
Yeah.
And nowadays we know the pineal gland doesn't work quite like that.
Right.
But hey, this was the 1600s. He was working with what he had.
It's like trying to build an iPhone back then.
Right. No way. But even if he was wrong about the pineal gland, he got people thinking about this stuff, which is huge.
So even if the answer wasn't perfect, he asked the right question.
Exactly. And that question, the mind-body problem, people are still trying to figure it out today.
So it's like one of the biggest mysteries in philosophy.
Totally. But, even if we don't buy into the whole pineal gland thing, there's still something appealing about this idea that there's this inner me that's different from my physical body.
Totally. It's like we all feel like there's more to us than just our flesh and bones. There's our thoughts, our feelings, experiences.
Yes. And that's what makes Descartes still relevant today.
Yeah, so it's not just a theory, it's something we feel in our own lives.
Precisely. And even if he didn't nail the details, this idea that there's an inner self has been super important in Western thought.
Okay, so we've got, I think, therefore I am. We've got the mind-body problem. We even did Jod.
We did.
What else is in these meditations?
Well, there's his whole discussion of error. Like, why do we even make mistakes?
Oh, yeah. I was wondering about that. If God is perfect, how come we mess up so much?
Right. It's like, shouldn't we be perfect too? Well, he addresses it in Meditation 3.
Okay.
He says it's not God's fault. It's about how our intellect and our will work together.
Okay.
Our intellect, our ability to understand stuff, is limited.
Yeah, makes sense. We're not all knowing.
Right, but our will, our ability to choose stuff, that's unlimited.
Oh, okay, so we can choose things even if we don't understand them.
Yep, and that's where the mistakes come in.
Ah.
When we let our will, like, run wild and don't use our brains enough.
Yeah, I do that all the time.
Me too. We all do. But he gives us some tips, though.
Okay, like what?
Well, he says we got to be careful, think things through.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to say, I don't know, that kind of stuff.
Like, be humble.
Exactly. Use your reason, but know its limits.
It's like he's giving us a philosophy lesson and a life lesson at the same time.
Right. Pretty cool, huh? And a lot of what he says about avoiding mistakes, it's like, it's about clear perception. Remember that?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Like being sure of what you're thinking.
Yeah, don't just believe anything. Wait till it's clear.
So be sure.
Be sure.
So it's about using reason, but also knowing when to, like, pump the brakes.
Exactly. Don't jump to conclusions. And that's actually a good segue back to the senses. Remember how Descartes started by doubting them?
Totally. It was like his whole thing.
Right. Well, it turns out he doesn't think we should always distrust them.
Right, really?
Yeah. He even writes a whole meditation about how material things actually exist.
So he came around.
He did. But it's not like a total flip-flop.
Okay. He's saying, look, the senses can trick us, but they can also be reliable.
So it's about using them wisely.
Yeah. Like, don't just believe everything you see or hear, but also don't ignore your senses completely.
It's all about balance.
Balance, yeah.
Okay, so how does he actually go from doubting everything to saying, yeah, the world is real?
Well, he's got a few arguments. First, he says we have this clear idea of corporeal nature. It's like the essence of what makes stuff physical, like extension and all that.
Gotcha.
And he says God wouldn't give us this idea if it was totally bogus.
Right.
So since God's not messing with us, there must be a real world out there.
Because a perfect God wouldn't create us with totally useless ideas.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. What else?
Well, he also says that we need a body to even imagine things.
I never thought about that.
Right. Like, if we were just pure minds with no physical stuff, how could we picture a tree or anything?
So our imagination is like proof that we have bodies which are in a physical world. Yeah, it's like he's saying the fact that we can even have these mental images means there must be something physical out there that they're based on.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
Right. And then finally, he talks about all those natural instincts we have, like feeling hungry or thirsty.
Yeah. Or
wanting to avoid pain, all that.
Yeah.
He says those instincts only make sense if there's a real world for us to,
interact with.
Yeah. Like, why would we feel hungry if there wasn't any food, right?
Right. Okay, so he's basically saying our senses are usually pretty good at keeping us alive, so they can't be that unreliable.
Exactly. And since God wouldn't trick us, he must have given us senses that work. Most of the time.
Okay, so he's back to the senses, but now it's not about totally trusting them or totally distrusting them.
It's about being smart about it.
Using our judgment.
Exactly. Know their strengths and weaknesses. It's about balance.
Man, this is a lot. I think, therefore I am. The mind-body thing, proving God, how to avoid mistakes, and now, like, the whole world is back on the table.
Descartes covers a lot of ground. But there's more.
Wait, there's more.
What about his pilot and the ship analogy? That's a famous one.
Yeah, that one. The mind's the pilot, the body's the ship.
Exactly. And that's a great starting point for our next dive into Descartes. We'll unpack that analogy, talk about what works, what doesn't, and look at some other ideas about this whole mind-body mystery.
Okay, can't wait for that. Okay, so we're back. Still deep in Descartes land.
Still here.
Feels like we've been through a lot.
Yeah, we've done some serious thinking.
Serious thinking. But now for, like, the main attraction.
Oh, yeah.
The pilot in the ship analogy. It's got to be one of Descartes' most famous bits.
Oh, yeah, it's a classic.
It's so good for picturing, like, how can something totally non-physical, the mind, affect a real body,
It's a great image, and Descartes uses it to really drive home this idea of interaction.
Okay.
The mind's the pilot steering the ship, which is the body.
Yeah. Everyone knows that part.
Right. The pilot decides where to go. But the ship itself, how it's built, whether it's leaky or not, all that stuff, it affects how well the pilot can steer.
So it's not just a one-way thing?
Yep.
The body kind of pushes back on the mind?
Yeah, totally. Think about it. If the ship's taking on water, the pilot's going to be dealing with that instead of, like, charting a course to some island.
Right. Survival first, then fancy sailing.
Exactly. But you're right to point out, this analogy has been criticized.
Oh, yeah.
People say it makes it sound like the mind is like the boss and the body just obeys.
Kind of like a dictator.
Yeah, a mind dictator. But in reality, our bodies affect our minds all the time.
Big time.
Like if you're sick or tired.
Yeah, or hangry.
Or hangry,
Yep.
exactly. It totally changes how you think.
Yeah. So maybe the analogy is a bit too neat and tidy.
Yeah, maybe a little.
Yeah.
But it does get at this question. How do these two totally different things interact?
Right, right. It's still that mind-body problem bugging us.
It's a tough one. And because of this whole separate substances idea, some folks think Descartes makes it hard to explain how they connect.
So what do other people say? If it's not all about this mind pilot.
Well, there's this idea called materialism.
Okay.
Basically, they're like, nope, it's all just matter.
So, like, no soul, no mind, that's separate.
Yeah, it's all about the brain, the physical stuff.
So consciousness is just like the brain doing its thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A very complex thing, of course, but still physical.
Huh. Okay, so that's different from Descartes.
Very different.
Are there any other ideas about this?
Oh, yeah. There's idealism, too.
Okay, what's that one?
They're kind of the opposite of the materialists.
Huh.
They're like, nope, it's all about the mind. The world is like a product of the mind.
Whoa. Like the Matrix, but my mind's the computer.
Kind of like that. They'd say what we think is the physical world.
Yeah.
It's really just our minds making it up.
Okay, now my head is spinning.
Yeah, it gets pretty wild. Dualism, materialism, idealism.
It's like a philosophical buffet, but no one really knows the right answer.
Nope, the mind-body problem is still unsolved.
It makes you think.
It does. But even though Descartes might not have gotten it all right,
Yeah.
he got us thinking about it. And his focus on reason, questioning things,
Yeah.
that's super important, even today.
Okay, so, big picture.
Yeah.
What do we take away from all this Descartes stuff?
Well, like we've been saying, it's about using your brain.
Yeah.
Don't just accept stuff, question it.
Be skeptical.
Exactly. Descartes shows us we can do that.
It's like he gives us permission.
Yeah. Permission to think for ourselves.
It's a good feeling.
It is. And that's especially important now, right, when there's so much info out there.
Yeah, like information overload.
Totally. So we got to be smart about it, figure out what's true, what's not.
Like Descartes would want us to do.
Exactly. He'd be proud.
So where do we go from here? What's after Descartes?
That's the cool thing about philosophy. It never really ends.
Yeah.
These meditations, they're just the beginning.
Like a launch pad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For more questions, more thinking about the big stuff.
It's exciting. So to everyone listening,
Yeah.
keep thinking, keep questioning, keep exploring. We've had a blast diving deep into Descartes.
Me too. It's been fun.
Thanks for joining us on this philosophical adventure.